You hear everything? Is everything cool? I hear you.
Testing 1 2.
Hear you just fine. Hear you just fine. All right, welcome everybody to the show. My name is David Russell, and I am the host of PorA. And I had a co-host, but he's having a little bit of technical difficulties right now, which is okay because I'm here with a person that I have learned a lot from, that I've followed for a long time, and he's part of the Reasons to Believe team. His name is Ken Samples. How are you, Professor? Right, you're a professor.
That's right. I'm doing well, David. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
Like I said, it's a pleasure, guys. Ken is a philosopher and theologian and has a passion to help and understand the reasonableness and relevance of Christianity's truth claims. He is a senior research scholar at Reasons to Believe and the author of several books, including Christianity Cross-Examined, Classic Christian Thinkers, and God Among the Sages. That's correct, right? I got all that
right. You nailed them. Yes, right on target.
Right on. So I remember that you had your own podcast at one time, but this was before you joined the Reasons team, and I was so upset because I was like, he's leaving, and then I was like, oh, but they're gonna have a new podcast, and you know what? I never got y'all's new podcast. I never was able to find it, but I loved listening to you, and I still read a lot of your articles today. Matter of fact, with using Christianity Cross-Examined, I actually used some of your stuff for my research papers this week. Look, Travis has got it too. Yep, yeah. I got my copy right here.
Very good. Glad to hear it.
Yeah, it was a really helpful book, and that's kind of what I wanted to open up with. Travis, are you hearing everything okay now?
I am now. I actually had issues with my microphone, so I had to just basically unplug it and just use my laptop.
Oh, that's fine. I mean, it happens. We all have technical issues. But okay, so before we get into the book, Ken, I just have a fun question for both of you guys. What's your favorite reindeer?
Wow. Well, I guess it would have to be Rudolph.
Right on. Travis, your turn, man. Come on. What's your favorite reindeer, man?
Professor Samples stole my thunder. I was going to say Rudolph as well. It's like that's everyone's favorite. The red-nosed reindeer. Come on, how can you go wrong with
Well,
that?
I'm gonna go with Comet because that's one Dr. Ross would probably like. So no, I'm just kidding. But the reason I bring it up is because I got a little special treat for you guys. I was actually gonna have you consider 3 other reindeer that were gonna come along, and this is them. So, I hope that's convincing enough for you, Professor Samples.
I'll tell you, those are some hip reindeers, no doubt about it.
Yeah, we wanted to say Merry Christmas to not only to you but to all of our fans too that really help bring broadcasts like these together. And we have a very special show tomorrow that we just actually put together last minute, and it's our Christmas special. So we don't want anybody to miss out on that. That's going to be a fun time. It's a collaboration show with the Complete Sinner's Guide. So Tyler Fowler and me will be leading that up. So, but yeah, let's get into the interview. Why, or Professor Samples, why, with all the I guess apologetics books out there and stuff like that, what compelled you, what led you to actually write Christianity Cross-Examined?
Yeah, well, about 35 years ago, I was working at the Christian Research Institute with Walter Martin. And after Martin's death, I was one of the people that was a co-host of the Bible Answer Man. And so in those years, in the late 80s, I would sometimes go to the universities and give talks. And virtually all the questions in those days were truth questions. Does God exist? Is Jesus the Son of God? What about the truth of the world's religions, etc.? Now, moving forward, I've worked at RTB now for Reasons to Believe now. This is my 25th year there. So I noticed about 10 or 12, maybe 15 years ago that when I would go to the university, the questions seemed to be changing. It's not that I didn't get any truth questions, but I got a lot of questions about whether Christianity had been a good thing, whether Christianity had been good for the world. Has it been good for women? Has it been good for racial minorities? And I got questions about whether the God of the Old Testament is consistent with Jesus in the New Testament. So I thought to myself that from a philosophical point of view, it seems like there's somewhat of a change from questions relating to modernism to postmodernism. And I thought maybe there could be some benefit of writing a book that would address both Christianity's truth questions as well as whether it's a good thing. And I'm glad I did it because I think that those are the questions that seem to be primarily on the minds of many people. So that's what I do. The first half of the book looks at truth questions. The second half tries to address whether Christianity has been a good force in the world.
Yeah, one of the other things I wanted to ask you, does this relate to identifying like the two type of atheists that you're talking about? Could you explain that?
I sure could. I'm going to use this as like a model. It's kind of like a thought experiment, if you will. So there are two types of atheists. One type of atheist would say, it may not be a bad thing if God existed. I mean, if God existed, maybe I would survive the death of my body. Maybe I could be reunited with my loved ones. Maybe it would give me greater meaning in my life and purpose. The problem is there are no good reasons to believe that God exists. So that's the first atheist. He's open to maybe believing it, but he just isn't persuaded from a rational basis. Now, the second atheist is different. The second atheist says, oh, no, there are plenty of arguments for God, and there are plenty of very bright people who believe in God. The problem is, I don't want that God to exist. I don't want a God who is perfectly holy and righteous and may cast me into hell. And I think that you can see individuals that fit in the category. That second category, uh, somebody like oh boy, now I can't remember his name. Lots of people fit into that category, and I think we're seeing as well people in the first category. You have people like um, you have people who are looking at Christianity and say, there are a lot of good things about it. Tom Holland in his book Dominion says things like that. Peterson is another individual who says things like that. And Nagel would be the philosopher in the other category. So I think there are atheists, and people have said that maybe you have to want to believe before you can actually believe. So Christianity Cross-Examined is my appeal to people who are in those categories.
Right on. Yeah, one of the first things I wanted to ask you, since you divided up the book so well, I was going to ask you for the first section of the book, what is your favorite apologetic argument?
Yeah, well, I like that question very much. Yeah, well, I there are a lot of, I think, very cogent arguments. I think Christianity has a lot of tools at its disposal in terms of presenting evidence and arguments for God. I think at the end of the day, however, I'm a Christian because I think that God and Christianity provide the best explanation for the most meaningful realities of life. I mean, I look at the universe, it appears to have had a singular beginning. It appears to be extraordinarily fine-tuned. It's also a universe that is intelligible to the human mind. When I look at other realities, I look at morality. I mean, there are certainly things in life that are wrong no matter what, like murdering people and engaging in sex trafficking. Those things there's not a maybe about that. Those are clear moral evils in the world. I also think that it makes sense of abstract entities like mathematics, like logic, uh, sets, and things of that nature. And then finally, I think Christianity makes good sense of Jesus Christ, his life, his death, his resurrection. And so in some ways I'm taking in logic what we call an abductive approach, reasoning, inference to the best explanation. And that is very powerful to me. I think if you adopt an atheist point of view, you have a real hard time explaining how life can have objective meaning, how there can be morality, and even how you can have rationality. And of course, Eastern mystical worldviews, they have their flaws. So that's that abductive inference to the best explanation is something I'm very comfortable with.
Yeah, I really appreciated your teleological argument. You actually add a premise there, and I don't want to give too much away because we're going to talk about it. But you basically said in your very first premise that science shows that there's fine tuning. And I thought that was very interesting because usually you just get, somebody just asserts the fine tuning and then they go to, and the reason is, and then they go to the next premise and so forth. But you actually add that science shows that. And I think that's very important because I use that in my paper. I was like, this is very important. We have to see what the science says. And we can't just assert that it's fine-tuned. Let's see what the scientists have to say. And I thought that was a very powerful point.
Yeah, it's, I think I can say quite confidently that fine-tuning is no longer controversial in science.
Yeah.
The question is, how do we explain it?
Mm-hmm.
That begins to be controversial, but that there is fine-tuning is, I think, a pretty well settled idea within the scientific community.
Right. So before we get into the stronger questions here, one more fun question.
Yeah.
What's your favorite theological topic?
Wow, thank you. Boy, you got some really good questions. I like it. Well, I would say that my favorite theological topic is the Trinity. I find God being one and three being very, very profound. In fact, not long ago, I had a conversation with a Muslim imam, and I asked him, I said, Allah is a single solitary God. I said, before Allah created human beings and angels, who did Allah love in eternity? And if there was no one to love, was he desperate to create to fulfill himself? And that conversation just exploded. And over many years, I've been talking with Jehovah's Witnesses. That was the first kind of apologetic work I did at CRI 30 years ago. But, I would always say, well, the Bible teaches the Trinity. They say, no, it doesn't. I say, yes, it does. No, it doesn't. But now I don't ask them. I don't approach it that way. I ask them, you believe Jehovah is a single solitary God. Well, how can Jehovah be loving? Does he have to create? And so the Trinity is, for me, my favorite area to think about and to talk about and to worship and to write about.
Yeah, it's very interesting because how could he even know what love was if it wasn't even existent? It wasn't part of who he was, so he has to exist in relationship. How would he even know to put creatures together and to express how to maintain a relationship or to even be in one at that point? How are we relational creatures?
And if God is love, as First John says, then with the triune God, you have a community of persons. Therefore, you have a maximally perfect being. God can be loving. God doesn't need to create to fulfill himself, unlike the Unitarian views of God, Jehovah's Witnesses, Islam, and other religions.
Right on. Travis, do you have anything? I've been kind of hogging the mic.
Oh, that's okay. It's kind of ironic, earlier my mic wasn't working, so you can. But yeah, so first of all, I want to thank Professor Samples for coming on, and I do want to say I really appreciate what you do at Reasons to Believe. Kind of shared last week we had Jeff Zwerig on, and yeah, Reasons to Believe is actually I grew up kind of not believing in God, and so Reasons to Believe was the ministry that I actually came to faith through.
Wow.
And it had such a powerful impact on me. I joined Reasons Institute and got a certificate of science apologetics, and actually joined the Reasons to Believe apologetics community. So I'm very pro Reasons to Believe, and I myself want to do whatever I can to promote the ministry because I think it's really top notch, and I wanted to be a part of it. So that's kind of why I joined the apologetics community.
Well, very good. I'm glad to hear that. We're encouraged by those stories.
Absolutely. And I was going to say, I really like your approach, your abductive approach with an inference to the best explanation. So I'm also really big in the philosophy of science. And I really like how in your book you laid out the argument from beauty, which I really like, how you say that, basically, you talk about, the longing for God, and how, Christianity would provide the explanation. It would provide the best explanation. So plausibly, there's reason to believe Christianity is true. And then you kind of touch on the argument from beauty. So I was wondering if you could just briefly lay that out, because I think the argument from beauty is one of the most underrated theistic arguments.
Yeah, thank you for that. What I think is interesting about what I call the aesthetic argument, or the argument for beauty, is that many secular people would never go to church, but they love art museums. They love, they're passionate about art and beauty. And of course, one of the questions is if God doesn't exist and the world is kind of a brute reality, then how do we explain beauty? Some people would propose that maybe beauty has some survival advantages. Maybe within birds, the colors of feathers that are more attractive might lead to a mate, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But I think with the incredible amount of beauty and the fact that human beings are so extraordinarily driven by beauty, by aesthetic elements, I don't think atheism has a very good explanation for why there's beauty. Now, if God exists, and of course, Christians talk about God being beautiful. We talk about the beatific vision.
Yes.
That's when human beings will encounter God, will enjoy him forever. I think it's an interesting and powerful argument. And I would say, some people would say, well, but doesn't everybody have a subjective view of beauty?
Right.
I would say no. I would say that we all have our taste. My wife, she loves national parks. I love museums. I like to go to the Vatican and look at some of these incredible works of art. Well, we have different taste in art, but this universal awareness of beauty, it seems to be universal in nature. And I think that because we kind of live in a postmodern time where people are kind of turned off to truth questions, I even propose maybe we could start with beauty and then kind of circle back to questions of truth and goodness. And again, I don't know anybody who is not attracted to beauty. I wonder if it's an underutilized apologetic argument.
I believe it is.
Yeah, I do too. I was going to get your opinion on this because you talked about the subjectivity of beauty, and I think that's where our society began to really decline into that postmodern era, is because they subjectified beauty. Like they say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and that's just not true. I think there is an objectivity about it, and I think that once that's lost, that's when you saw, like, it looks cool to do this, so they started striving for something else, and it's because we've lost that objective sense. So I think that's very prominent that you said that, because once that becomes relativized, then morality becomes relativized, and it's like a snowball effect. So do you see stuff like that as well?
Yeah, I think that I think people critique the argument from beauty the way they critique the argument from morality. So with beauty, they would say it's purely subjective. My response is only in taste. There's a universal principle that stands behind it. But people would also talk about the problem of the ugly. I mean, if God created a beautiful world, why are there things that are ugly, that are not attractive, that violate our sense of aesthetic? Of course, I would argue that that just as evil has to exist on goodness as a host, evil can only be evil given a context of goodness. I would argue that ugly can only exist in the context of beauty. So again, we often talk about God as an engineer. We talk about God as a scientist type of person. I think we should also talk about God as an artistic artist.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really cool about that is that we can all agree that spiders are objectively ugly, So, but
They're
but no,
certainly objectively scary.
yes, sir. But it's really funny you kind of give the sunshine shadows analogy there. That's what I always think of. And you can have beauty without ugliness, but you can't have ugliness without beauty. I think that's very true, as well as evil and good. And that's really cool. Cool. It's really cool to think about, and to expound upon, because as Travis was saying, it is an underrated argument, and we do kind of need to look at it more. I think we need to revive it in a way. So yeah, I would definitely be on board with that. Travis, do you have anything else before we move on that aspect?
Just that I wanted to highlight the fact that I like Professor Sample's approach of not just because of my love for the philosophy of science, but I think abductive arguments can be powerful in their subtlety, in their modesty, and so I like when we talk about arguments from beauty, and even I like the abductive moral argument as well. Yeah, I think it's really powerful. The way that Professor Samples kind of lays it out in the book, and I recommend everyone check it out.
Well, Travis, I appreciate you bringing that up, because one thing I like to do when I'm talking to people who are not Christian, maybe they're secular, maybe they're in another religion, etc. When you reason abductively, it is a modest argument, and I can say, yeah, I think your worldview has a certain level explanatory power,
Sure.
but does it have scope? Does it have kind of a definitive element? But you're exactly right. Abductive arguments are intended to be more modest.
Right, and it kind of seems like in the philosophy of religion that a lot of things, because you look at people like Oppie, and then like Rasmussen and Swinburne who respond to that. It's kind of like theism. I think can be thought of as sort of like these grand theories of what's simple, what unifies the various facts of reality, what has the explanatory power, depth, coherential virtues. That's doesn't violate warranted beliefs, has an aesthetic beauty in its explanation, and things like that.
Yeah, very good. Right.
Right on. Well, Travis, do you have any other questions, or do we want to move on to or can I take it back over, or what?
Yeah, go ahead, please. I
Professor
just love
Samples, you say in the first chapter that there's a long-standing war between science and Christianity, and I was wondering if you could explain that.
Yeah, I actually think that is a statement that is made by a number of kind of elite secular scientific people, but it's not the case. It's certainly true that with Galileo there have been controversies relating Christianity or the church to the study of modern science, but for the most part, science and Christianity have gotten on really well. Let me mention just some specific areas. Historically, I mean, the scientific revolution took place in the middle of the 1600s. The vast majority of the early scientists were Christian, were Jewish. So, it was the Christian worldview within European society that says, look, God is a rational being. He created the universe. He endowed it with logic and laws, nomos and logic and laws. And therefore, he made people in his image. Therefore, they can study, they can track the intelligibility of nature. So I think that Christianity and science have had a very close and intimate relationship, not just because of the early scientists being Christian, and not just because of the worldview encouraged Christianity, but I also think that the presuppositions, that is the starting points of science, these philosophical starting points. I remember I was in a debate with a professor from the University of University of Fresno, Northern California, a very fine school. And he said, my opponent in the debate, he said, as a scientist, I have no beliefs. He said, science is independent of any worldview beliefs. So I was shocked. I said, well, wait a second here. I said, don't you believe that there's a real mind independent world out there? I said, don't you believe that you can trust your cognitive faculties and sensory organs? Don't you believe math and logic are valid? Don't you believe that there is a uniformity? There's laws of nature. I said, science is filled with philosophical assumptions, and these are assumptions you begin with. You don't derive them through the scientific method. So I think that science has a dependence on both philosophy and theology. Now, it's certainly true that other religions might want to make a case. I mean, some of the finest scientists in the world have been Jewish, but they share our theistic orientation. And as different as Islam is to Christianity, they still share that basic view of a theistic orientation. So, when people claim that Christianity and science have been at war, the answer is more often they have been allies, not enemies.
Right on, right on. So, that kind of led me to the second question, but you pretty much answered it. So you see science as compatible with the faith.
I do. It doesn't mean that there aren't questions. I mean,
Of course,
leading question now is of evolution. How do we, within the scientific community, the basic view of the origin of human beings has to do with, a naturalistic evolution. So, sure, there are still questions we debate. There are still issues that we work through. But I think historically and philosophically, they've had a very close and intimate relationship.
Right on, right on. Well, here's another question that I was like, I got to ask him this. Why do you say that the question of purpose, is there a purpose, the most enduring?
Yeah, I think that human beings, from a Christian point of view, from a biblical point of view, I think because we're made in the image of God, we have an awareness of eternity. In fact, if I can quote a great scientist and a great Christian, Blaise Pascal, he said, human beings are an enigma of greatness and wretchedness. Greatness because of the image of God, wretchedness because of the fall. I think all people have a desire, a yearning to understand, why am I here? What's my purpose in life? Why is there this extraordinary universe before me? And what is my place in all of that? I mean, these are kind of the fundamental questions of life. These are the questions that drew me to study philosophy. And I think that Christianity has good answers for those types of things. The reason we yearn for meaning, purpose, and significance is because we were made to know and love God. The reason we're frustrated in trying to find those things is because of our fallen condition.
Right on, right on. Travis, you have any questions?
Well, to kind of just piggyback on that, because I think that's a really point that, we kind of have this sense of eternity, this longing, in a sense, for God. And I'm wondering if you think, would you consider that sort of evidence for the afterlife? Because I think, and I'm not sure that, but I think that only humans have this awareness of death and this possibility that there's something beyond, like in the afterlife. What are do you see that as sort of an evidence for the afterlife?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a growing consensus. I think I can put it that way. Even in the scientific community, that human beings are not just different from the animals in degree, but we're different in kind. A lot of scientists talk about human exceptionalism, and some of the things that make us exceptional is our ability to have speech, our ability to to speculate philosophically, our ability to ask deep philosophical questions. And I like Augustine, I like Pascal, and I like C.S. Lewis, because all of them kind of raise that question: where do these yearnings from human beings come from?
Right.
How can they best be fulfilled? And which worldview is able to explain that? And so, Lewis argued that just as we have a desire, we're thirsty, well, there's water, we're hungry, well, there's food. Lewis, in that tradition of Pascal and Augustine, argues then that, we have these spiritual yearnings. And could it be possible that those are fulfilled in another world? And so I find, if I could put it this way, I think a very good worldview question is: which worldview is livable? Which worldview is existentially fulfilling and satisfying? I think that argument is also underutilized, and I think for a lot of people would find it appealing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I also appreciate in the book how you point out where people's reasoning is flawed, like bad trains of thought and stuff like that. You point that out in the book very well. And that is one of the things you do not see in a lot of apologetic books, is explaining where the inconsistency comes from.
Yeah.
So I was really appreciative, and that is to me kind of echoes what you probably used to do with CRI, because that's kind of, I'm revealing my age here. I am 40. I started with CRI too, and that kind of got me out of the Word of Faith movement, which I was a part of for 7 years. And it started out Pentecostal, but then it just got worse and worse and worse. And, I was lucky I had a long shift that was about 12 hours at my work, and the last bit I would always listen to CRI, the Bible Answer Man and stuff, right? So I would be on my way home listening to that and started having questions, and then my dad died, and then I had a real big crisis of faith, and then God launched me into apologetics myself. So it was like learning that and just hearing that where people don't get that idea, where, okay, point out my flaw in thinking. What are the 3 rules of logic? Don't tell me excluded middle. Give me an example so I don't make the mistake. And then there is that thing that I think that you said earlier that just resonates with me, is there's this volitional aspect, this volitional hurdle that as evangelists and as apologists that we have to be able to assess before we can go anywhere. And that's the heart, man, that people's resistance because of a lack of desire. Maybe I find apathy to be a real thing, especially in this postmodern world. Our dependence on technology and our love for it, our lack of it kills the imagination. These days you don't get new movies, you get reboots. That's just one part of the pandemic there of the imagination going out the door. But so I do hear that. Now I'm gonna transition the podcast just a little bit, and I'm gonna ask you some questions here. Because I think I've confused the audience by jumping around enough. So when I ask you these questions, you're going to know what these questions are. The audience might not, but you're going to see what I'm doing. So you don't have to give it a very, very in-depth answer if you don't want to, but you can go as deep as you want. So, I wanted to ask, is faith compatible, or isn't faith incompatible with reason?
Yeah, that's a terrific question, because so many people think that, faith is just wishful thinking, whereas reason, you look at facts and evidence. Actually, the definition of faith that I use in my book is a definition that people like Augustine, Anselm, Aquinas, all the way down to today we use. that faith is confident trust in a reliable source. So the root of the word faith in Greek, pistos, pistuo, to believe, it's to trust. But I don't put my trust anywhere. I don't have blind faith. I put my faith in a reliable source. And therefore, the very definition of faith involves reason. Yeah, it's confident trust. Faith may go beyond reason, but it doesn't violate reason. And I think there are other things we can say about faith and reason. You know, when it comes to the mysteries of the Christian faith, I mean, we talked a bit about the Trinity. We could talk about the incarnation. We could talk about the atonement. These are very profound theological mysteries. As finite creatures, we can't totally get our minds around them, but great Christian thinkers, theologians, philosophers, etc., through the centuries have given us arguments of ways of thinking about the Trinity and the incarnation, and have provided a viable way for how these mysteries can be true. And I think, lastly, that if God exists and has an infinite mind, then it shouldn't be surprising that he created us who have finite minds.
Yeah, but aren't theological mysteries just really logical contradictions?
And I would say no, they're not, in the sense that I don't want to steal away the mystery. I don't want to dismiss the mystery. And what we mean by that is, I don't know how God is one in essence and three in personhood. I don't know how exactly Jesus is a single person who has both a divine and human nature. But I do think you can set forth the Trinity and the incarnation in a way that doesn't violate the laws of logic. So I love the church fathers and the early councils of the church because they prized both mystery and reason.
Right.
Wow. Well, yeah. So, yeah, I was about to say, you talked about the church fathers and stuff like that, and it brought that idea of beauty up again, in my mind, and I was thinking, do you take a classicalist view of like sin and evil, where it's like misshapen form? It's like and it kind of goes with the sunshine and shadows thing. I think that's probably where it originated from, or that idea of like sin corrupting form.
Yeah.
And if you look at it like that, I mean, I think that's very interesting, and it would lead to ideas that I think can help answer the problem of evil. But I'll get your take first.
No, I appreciate that approach too. For example, Augustine would say that the fall has led to a disordered desires. So, when people are separated from God, they cling to and are attracted by good things. Sex is a good thing. It's not a bad thing, but we take a good thing and we warp it, or we expect eternal results from finite practices. I mean, money is not a bad thing. I like being able to pay my mortgage. I like being able to purchase some groceries. It's nice when I take my debit card out to know that there's some money in there. But if I make money the ultimate goal of my life, it will lead to a deep disordering. I mean, food is a good thing. What do we do, however? We eat too much of it. I think that there is a disordering. And again, I think it's interesting that fallen human beings, they don't usually go for the bad things, they warp the good things.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think you're right about that. And isn't Christianity one of the few that teach that, like these are good things, like the flesh is a good thing, sex is a good thing, and that we kind of corrupt it.
Yeah. And again, if we disorder those, then we wonder, well, why isn't this more fulfilling? I mean,
Right.
I had a friend, in high school. He was a top athlete. He was a ladies' man. And I remember him telling me, I don't feel satisfied with all of these sexual conquests. And I thought, wow, here's a guy who has all of these things and he's not terribly happy. Well, because we were created to know and love and honor God. Sex is a good thing within marriage. Money is a good thing if it's managed well, if you are generous and if you utilize it well. Food's a good thing, but if you make it, if you become addicted to it, then there's that disordering element.
Yeah, I do love food too. So, especially sweets,
Italian food.
But, Professor Samples, brings me to another question, though, about the problem of evil. And can Christianity make sense of suffering and longing of suffering? And is there a such thing as like natural evil, or is it something else?
Yeah, those are good questions. They're deep questions. One of the things I like about talking about Christmas, talking about the Advent season, I think the two arguments that leading atheists these days bring against God are God's hidden, alleged hiddenness, and the problem of evil. But if you look at Christmas, I mean, the second person of the Trinity takes a human nature in the womb of the Virgin Mary and becomes man. I mean, God enters into human history. Jesus is the most consequential person. Everything is dated before or after him. It's hard to think that God is hidden when he's made an appearance in the world as an actual human being. Secondly, Jesus suffered with us and for us. I mean, Jesus had problems with his family. He had controversies with the religious leaders of the time. His disciples who were supposed to stay with him, they abandoned him. I take great comfort in the idea that the second person of the Trinity, the Son of God, he knows what it's like to suffer. He knows what it's like to die. He knows what it's like to be to have people break their trust with you. I think Christianity has an extraordinary answer for longing and for suffering. And I don't think God is hidden. I mean, maybe the best argument for God is just opening up the New Testament and reading the Gospels. This extraordinary person, Jesus, there's no one like him. I have another book, God Among Sages, where I compare Jesus with Krishna, Buddha, Confucius, and Muhammad. It's not just that David, Travis, and Ken don't fare very well with Jesus. Nobody does. He's one of a kind.
Right. Travis, you got anything here?
Yeah. So, Professor Simples, I was wondering, when we talk about natural evil, like problems of natural evil, I'm curious, do you think the fine-tuning plays any role in this? Because and it's kind of like the course I took on astronomy and design. But when we look at it's like hurricanes help regulate precipitation. This volcanic eruptions act as fertilization events. We need predator to prey relationships and functioning ecosystems. I'm thinking that doesn't really seem like an observation I would expect given indifference. But I was kind of wondering what your thoughts are about the fine tuning in regards to natural evils.
I agree with you, Travis. Listening to Hugh Ross, listening to Dave Rogstad, Jeff Swearing, Fuzz Rana, they talk about natural evil having trade-offs. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there is this potential devastation that can come with hurricanes and things of that nature. But there are also the benefits. I mean, I'm not particularly fond of looking at a snake attack a bunny, but the reality is, to have a thriving ecosystem, you have to have a predator. And so death before the fall, in my mind, is not a big challenge. I would add one more to that, Travis. I think a lot of times natural evil is devastating because of moral evil. That is, we don't use good judgment. I remember the tsunami that struck Japan. Well, if you've got buildings right on the coast, you're taking a serious gamble there. So sometimes I think there is natural evil in the world because human beings don't exercise more solid judgment.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, and Travis, I was going to add to that too, is just something that I've been observing lately too, is that God gave us a wild planet. He calmed the storms, so he's the God that made those hurricanes. He's the God that made those storms. And I think that if we were living in the way that we were purposed to live, we wouldn't be dealing with natural evil. He probably knew that we would be the top predators. And he set those predator-prey relationships for that purpose. In other words, we serve a God that is intentional and purposeful. I mean, we're talking about the incarnation just a second ago, and those weren't ordinary shepherds that we see the angels come to. They were the Levite shepherds.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
saw
really interesting.
I saw a video just the other day. It was a video of about the big cats, and a jaguar dives into the river, and he grabs a caiman by the neck and takes it out of the water up a steep hill. And I'm thinking, some of these predators have extraordinary skill sets. I mean, talk about fine tuning. There are skills that predators have. Now, again, predation. I'm always happy when the little deer gets away from the wolves.
Sure.
But the reality is that you can't have rabbits running everywhere. To have a functioning ecosystem, you've got to have a predator. And God is the one in the Psalms 119, I believe it says that God gave the lions their food, and they don't eat oatmeal, they eat flesh.
Yeah, so that's why I wanted to run that by you, because it seems like, with this fine-tuning precision of like functioning ecosystems, hurricanes regulating precipitation, it's like we see not just an intelligence, but sort of an intentionality, like a purpose behind.
And a goodness, and it also teaches us morality. I mean, we live in a world, and sometimes things are beautiful, but they're dangerous. I mean, you see a tiger face to face, you realize, whoa, I've got to be careful.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. So let's kind of focus a little bit on Christianity. I mean, was the emergence of Christianity and spread of Christianity a natural or supernatural event?
Yeah, I like that question a lot. First of all, the birth of the church came through the resurrection of Jesus. There's no natural explanation for the emergence of Christianity other than the proclamation by the apostles that they had seen the risen Lord. But having said that, David, it seems that God had providentially picked the right time. I mean, in the Roman Empire, you have the Pax Romana. You have an empire that's at peace. That means that the gospel can be spread. I mean, what if you were in Syria or Afghanistan trying to share the gospel? I mean, warfare leads to information shutdowns. You also have the Greek language. I mean, the language of trade. There was the Latin language, there was the Greek language, but the Koine Greek, this common Greek, that was the language of trade and the language of the New Testament. I mean, imagine talking to people where you don't have to need a translation. You can communicate the gospel. The Roman roads, the Romans built them so their armies could move around. The Apostle Paul used them as ways of walking all over the Mediterranean world and founding churches. And you can look at many things that I think seem to fit providentially. The first two large people groups to join Christianity were women and slaves. Why? Because Jesus Christ gives dignity to women. And Jesus frees slaves. We're all slaves in the sense we're slaves to sin. And I think the message of the New Testament is people are made in the image of God. And Paul says in the book of Galatians that there's no difference between Jew, Gentile, slave, free, male or female. We're all one in Christ. So I think there were many things that kind of came together at just the right time for Christianity to flourish. So, by 30 AD, there's only Jesus and 12 disciples. By the end of the first century, Christianity has spread so much that Roman officials are commenting about it. By the 4th century, Christianity has dominated the entire Roman Empire, And today there's 2.2 to 2.3 billion Christians. It's by far the largest faith in the world.
Right on, but in saying that though, and just kind of two questions here, isn't Christendom hopelessly divided? And on right after that, why are so many Christians so unlike Christ?
Yeah. Well, these are great questions. Probably my favorite chapter in Christianity Cross-Examined has to do with whether Christianity is divided. And I would say this, I like to think of myself as a peacemaker. I won't debate denominational issues with other Christians until we first talk about what we have in common. So, what do Christians have in common? Well, I think there is a large amount of doctrine and teaching. I mean, whether you're Catholic, Orthodox, or Protestant, they affirm the Trinity, they affirm the incarnation, they affirm the atonement, they affirm the resurrection. Now, that's not to say that there aren't differences. There are differences about the authority of the church as opposed to the Bible, differences about how grace, faith, and works come together, differences about whether we should venerate Mary or merely honor her. But I think it's very clear that conservative Christians and conservative Christendom, we have a lot of common ground in doctrine and in values and in worldview orientation. Now, that other question you ask is a tough one, but I try to take it on. I think that there are two types of hypocrites. There's a hypocrite with a lowercase h, and that's everybody. None of us loves God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and our neighbor as ourselves. I don't think I've done that for 15 minutes in my life. Every day I wake up in the morning and say, Lord, I've sinned against you in my thoughts, my words, and my deeds, what I've done, what I've failed to do. Forgive me. Fill me with your spirit. Now, there's another type of hypocrite, however, and that's much more serious. That's what I would call a capital H hypocrite. That's a person who has actually three lives. They have a public life that everybody knows. They have a private life that their family and friends know, and then they have a secret life. And that secret life is, it's set apart, and they may engage in practices that are completely contrary to Christianity. They may not even be believers themselves. But we're all hypocrites except for one, and that's Jesus. I mean, I'll step on your toes, David. I think you will, Travis. You will, but you know what? Jesus will never disappoint. And the real question is whether he was authentic or a hypocrite. And I can tell you, Jesus was no hypocrite.
Yeah, I take the word of anybody that can come back to life after being dead for 3 days. So, Travis,
argument.
Right? Travis, do you have any other final thoughts here?
Yeah. So, this kind of has to do with epistemology. It has to do with like relationship with Christ, because like, for example, I'll use myself. Like, I notice sometimes when I'm really deep in prayer, I have this overwhelming sense of the presence of Jesus with me, like his loving hand touching me. It call it kind of the inner witness of the Holy Spirit, where I have this personal fellowship with Christ. And I know, like Alvin Plank, he has like a reformed epistemology, and William Lane Craig kind of has what he calls I think Holy Spirit epistemology, something like that. What are your thoughts on that? On how we make sense of like the experience of Christ and the Holy Spirit?
Yeah, I like your comments there, Travis. Yeah, I mean, the Apostle Paul in Romans 1, he says that we have an awareness of God.
Yeah.
We see God in nature, but we also see him in conscience. Calvin talked about the sensus divinitatis, that we have an awareness of God. And I think that's the case. I mean, when I became a Christian and devoted my life to Christ, I didn't come directly from an argument. It came out of need. I had a crisis. And that crisis then drove me to the question of where do I find meaning, purpose, forgiveness? I certainly think that God has a way of making himself known that's not limited merely to facts, arguments, and reasons, although there's plenty of good arguments to be made.
Yeah, I like it.
All right. Well, folks, if you hadn't noticed, some of these questions I just asked Ken in this last 25 minutes or so came directly from the book. So if they interest you, go out and get the book. He gives more detailed answers in the book than he just gave us right now. That's why I told him not to really go into it as much, just to give us a brief, answer. So, guys, if you want to read this book, if you want to learn more about the faith and stuff like that, I had to leave a lot of those questions on the cutting room floor because there just weren't, we don't have the time to go over them all. Ken goes over a lot more in the book, and it's a great book. I would suggest any of you guys going out and picking up a copy as soon as you can. It's simple to read. It's not like gonna break you if you read it. It's just gonna enlighten you. And as Travis even alluded to, I mean, there's some arguments that are underutilized in there that Christians, I think, need to understand and need to get into. So again, Professor Samples, we truly appreciate the time you've given us today, and we wish you a Merry Christmas.
Well, you got a great show, guys. Keep it up, and Merry Christmas to you and all your listeners.
Thank you very much. Travis, are you going to show up for the collab show tomorrow? It's going to be great. It's going to be
possibly,
a great time.
Yeah. Depending on what's going on, because I'm not quite sure just yet. But yeah, I mean, there's no reason why I wouldn't. So.
Yeah. And Professor Samples, if you want to come on and give us a testimony, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah. So again, guys, stay tuned tomorrow. It's the last show of the year. Honestly, we're gonna take the rest of we're gonna take our winter break because we need a rest. We've been working hard and bringing you guys content every week, so we're gonna take our little vacation and enjoy the incarnation of our Lord Jesus Christ. And with that, guys, we're gonna head out here. So have a great day.
Take care. God bless.